I don't think that people would have gone to the lengths that they did to be able to understand a record like This Is America, nor would they have had the willingness to engage with a sound that was a little bit different than they maybe heard on the radio or been hearing on their playlists as regularly. I mean, like This Is America was a record that got pop play. You know what I mean? Like the cultural conversation around it was so big and so relevant that everybody had to get involved at some point. But I think like when you look at it within the context of like what broke, what we needed to do, the first thing that we look at is
Jordan, what is happening?
What's up, Sam? How you doing?
Not much, man. Just had an incredible interview. Mr. Tarek Al-Hamdouni, the SVP of Digital Marketing at RCA. And I know we tend to hype up all our interviews, but this one deserves a little bit of extra hype because this is that hot fire. Tarek is an incredible human being. Like I said, he's the SVP of Digital Marketing at RCA. RCA has an incredible roster of different artists. I mean, even in this episode alone, we talk about how he rolled out This Is America with Childish Gambino. His team has also worked on Khalid's Free Spirit release, Pink. Also one of my favorite producers that I think is so incredible. And even though he's pretty big, is still really underrated. Kate Trinata, incredible artist on RCA. I know, Jordan, you had some experience working with RCA with GoldLink and helping Crew get to the place it did. So I think really excited about this episode in particular because in the episode with Tarek, we dive into a couple very tactical topics as it pertains to digital marketing. I think one, tracking performance and return on investment. I know it can be really challenging to do so. So really understanding his framework as to how he's testing different tactics and seeing the returns was valuable. I think he also did a really good job at level setting the foundation of the objective of a marketing team and digital marketing team. And that's really building an emotional connection between fans and the musician's art and diving into how a lot of the identity of consumers is actually tied to the artists that they support. We also speak about the importance of content and also tactics to get in front of your target audience. What stood out to you in this episode, Jordan?
I think something that we cover that a lot of people value that we obviously should or honestly should do more is how people got their foot in the door. I think kind of going into his origin story and how he ended up at a company like RCA will be really valuable for people wanting to get into the music industry. I also think we talk about longevity. So how to kind of stay there. He's been there for almost a decade. So how to really excel at that level for as long as he has. And then other than that, one thing I was really impressed with was we ended up speaking about what to think about before you start a digital marketing campaign. And I think, when we cover digital marketing or when people discuss digital marketing, it's obviously when you've done the campaign, do these things. But what about before, when you even start the campaign, what should you be thinking about? And I'm really glad we got into that. And obviously talking about This Is America, that was one of the biggest songs of the year when it came out in 2018, and kind of get into his head and to figure out, how that release ended up being as big as it was, I think was invaluable. So I'm really excited for people to hear that.
Yeah. Well, without any further ado, very excited to get right into this one. Mr. Tarek Al-Hamdouni. Tarek, how you doing, man? Welcome to the show.
I'm good. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be chatting with you.
Yeah, man. Very excited to have you on. With that said, for starters, I know we were just talking a little bit before the show started, but it seemed like you came to New York about 10 years ago and similar timing as to when you started working at RCA. Can you talk a little bit about what led you to join RCA and how you were really able to kind of get your foot in the door?
Yeah, for sure. Love telling this story because I think it's one that can be mimicked by a lot of different kind of young industry interested folks. But at the same time, it's one where I got very lucky as well. So, I think the one thing that I tell everybody who's joining the industry is that it takes a lot of hard work and it takes a lot of luck. And you're probably not going to make it as far as you want to without having a little bit of both, and understanding that luck plays a role in your development and your career development is really important in terms of remaining humble and also looking for opportunities to kind of coach up that next generation and kind of pay your good luck forward. But for me personally, I was a music fan from a young age. I started playing guitar like 12, 13, courtesy of my older brother starting to pick up a guitar, the normal kind of sibling transition from older to younger. But as I got more and more involved in music, I realized that that's something I wanted to do from a career perspective. And so I started looking into ways to do that. My family's always been fairly academically focused. My dad's a college professor. My mom was an engineer. And so from a very early age, college was very much on the table in terms of, the direction that I was pointed in. But at the same time, there's a tremendous amount of freedom in terms of follow your passion, follow what, where your interests lie, et cetera. And that led me to Northeastern University, where they have a music industry program. And one of the few in the country, although plenty have popped up over the past few years. But what I loved about that program was it was a heavy mix of both the business and the music side of things. And so, from day one of starting my career, I understood publishing, I understood mechanical royalties, I understood copyright, all those kind of minutia, all that minutia that from a marketing perspective, maybe not top of mind for a lot of people. But in terms of understanding how to navigate the industry and how to collaborate with your peers, the more you understand about all the little nuances about our business, the better it is. And so when I'm looking to hire people, a lot of times, if I see somebody that's gone through one of those college industry programs, more often than not, it's at least worth a conversation with them. I can't say that they're, the only people that we hire. That's definitely not the case. But, knowing that they have some of that key knowledge is something that I find really, really valuable. As part of going to Northeastern, I did 3 internships. My last internship was with J Records at the time in New York. So I did a 6-month program with them and essentially started learning digital marketing. At the time, it was like dating myself, but MySpace was the thing at the time, and so being a young person who had experimented with HTML on my own and kind of self-taught a bunch of stuff, that allowed me to step in and provide value from a very early standpoint. HTML was new to a lot of the industry. And so even just understanding how to update a background on a MySpace page was something that solved the problem for people. So, I think a lot of times you hear the advice of if you're looking for a job, find a way to make yourself invaluable. But I think, that would be an exaggeration in terms of kind of how my career started with RCA specifically. But Jay was eventually acquired by RCA Records or merged with RCA Records. And that was the real kind of bridge for me to make it into that world. My boss at the time my boss as an intern headed up the digital marketing team at J Records. When the merger happened, she took over the RCA and J Records department. Around that time, the department also grew. She got to promote her admin, and I got an opportunity to step in as an admin. And then, once I got a chance to plop down in that seat, I just took every opportunity in front of me to be vocal, to be humble and learn about what other people, brought to the table. But to never sit in a meeting and just be quiet, never to just be a body in a chair. I think that's something that I really push my team to currently to always keep in mind. And, these days with digital being on the forefront of pretty much everything, even if they wanted to be quiet, they wouldn't be able to. They're going to get called out for it. But that's largely how I got to RCA. From there, it was just a matter of, grinding it out and climbing, I was going to say climbing the corporate ladder. I think that's kind of a silly idiom, especially for our industry, because a ladder usually only goes up and down. I like to think of it more like climbing a mountain, because at the end of the day, if there's a boulder in your way, you take another path. And as a result of that, that mentality, I've taken a bunch of different paths throughout my career at RCA, at Sony, that have all been kind of centered within digital. But, it started with supporting projects, followed by running our CRM business, which evolved into managing our D2C business. After that, I kind of moved back towards running point on projects. And I did that until there was an opportunity to run point on the department, kind of made my pitch, explained kind of, what my history was, and obviously had made a lot of friends within the company by that point, so people knew what to expect from me. Got into the seat, and then just not giving it up without a fight.
Right. That kind of leads me to my next question, which is, what do you think is important in having longevity as an employee at a company like RCA? I mean, you kind of say that you took advantage of things when you could, you took advantage of opportunities, but what lessons do you think you learned in particular about just sustaining that level of excellence, I guess, over the course of a decade?
Sure. For me, patience is a big part of it. I can't say that I had a whole lot of that throughout my career. I think, I spent a lot of my early career being indignant and just fighting and wanting to, understand more, know more, be involved in more conversations, et cetera. And I think that ambition is a good thing, but I wouldn't necessarily say that blind ambition is a good way to go about it. I think longevity really comes down to being able to weather the storms of an individual project while continuing to stay motivated, creative, and collaborative. Our industry is filled with, tremendous opportunities and also tremendous hurdles and frustrations. At the end of the day, you're collaborating with another human being in the hopes of bringing their artistic vision to the masses, and those two things are always going to ebb and flow in terms of like, okay, do we need to reach the biggest audience humanly possible, or do we need to make a statement from our artistic perspective to really define who the artist is? And the frustrations that can come up in terms of getting on the same page can really demotivate people and kind of push them away. But I think if you're patient and you listen to what everybody has to say, and you understand that like this industry has so many opportunities for success that like, if you don't maximize the one that you could have, there's always going to be another opportunity around the corner. So save that energy that maybe you would direct internally to say, well, like, oh, he didn't do his job, or she didn't do their job, and like that energy that you take to finger point or to just be frustrated pulls away from the energy that you need to actually be able to accomplish your job. Frustration can be a good motivator for people. That it was for me. I would just grind my teeth and stay up until 2 a.m. to get my stuff done. But I don't think that's the healthiest way to go about it. I think the healthiest way to go about it is to build relationships with the people around you, learn from them, collaborate with them, help them to learn from you and discover what you're seeing that maybe they haven't been seeing. Don't assume that you know everything, but at the same time, don't for a second discount what you do know. And I think the only other thing I can say is like failure, at least for me and in a lot of places, if you give people a safe environment to experiment and to fail, it can be the greatest kind of educator on the planet. If I know that I've done something wrong or something that ineffective in a particular campaign that I really wanted to work, and it didn't because of an obvious error on my side of things, I'm not going to make that error again. Like that's going to stick with me for a very long period of time. But it's only going to stick with me as a motivator. If you have that in your mind and you start walking scared, you start thinking scared, et cetera, at a certain point, you've just opted out of participating in the company whatsoever. So, don't be afraid to be wrong, but be humble enough to recognize when you're wrong and then, make the progress towards, if it's a mistake, not making that mistake again, or if it's a learning, applying that to everything you're doing so that you can just be better than, you were the day before.
1,000%. No, it's a fun journey, I'm sure. And I think even now at the stage you're at, I'm sure you're continuing to grow and learn a lot. So that's exciting. In that vein too, I mean, as you've adapted and grown within the organization, how does the marketing department, what does it look like from like a staffing and resourcing standpoint? I know there's lots of different moving pieces, lots of different artists. So how are you going about structuring teams to support your objectives?
Yeah, I can tell you that there's a lot of discussion behind that now. I think, when you look at the industry overall, you will see that there's a sea change happening, right? Like our business has changed entirely. 5 years ago, we're focusing on downloads. That's a very different conversation with consumers than it is focusing on streams. And the main difference is our jobs got a lot easier in terms of a conversion perspective, right? Getting somebody to click play is a lot easier for somebody to open up their wallet, enter in their credit card information, and click buy. But I used to be able to get 100,000 people to click buy and feel really good about it. If I get 100,000 people to click play, pretty good, but I need them to do that every single day, every day of the week for the rest of the year to be able to make up the difference between what that front end funding was. And like, granted, the new model is great because it has a tail, like it's long, you're monetizing that consumption, not just, for the first week that you put the album out or when somebody buys it, but over a long course of time. And so the reason I say that before getting into the resource side of things and the staffing side of things is because I think you can expect every single label out there to change in a dramatic fashion over the next 5 years. And I think those changes are going to be putting more resources into the marketing, into the digital side of things, into the data side of things, and obviously already into the A&R side of things. You look at the number of artists that are being signed these days, it's just through the roof compared to where we were 5, 6, 7 years ago. And obviously the amount of revenue coming in plays a big role in that, and how streaming has been able to allow us to invest a lot more in signing artists, in developing artists, and putting their content out. In terms of how we're specifically staffed, I think our marketing team's in the 20 to 25 range. I wouldn't necessarily take that as gospel. They sit alongside our team on the digital marketing side of things that obviously have memorized a little bit better. We're about 13 people, and we are split amongst project leads who are really responsible for answering the question, what are we doing? What's the artist doing that's going to make a difference? I like to think of us as focusing on audience and affinity. If you think about how we make money today and how we make more money tomorrow, we have two options. We can either increase the number of people who are clicking that play button, or we can get those people who are clicking that play button to click it more often, right? In a perfect world, you're doing both at the exact same time. And what we found is the best way to reach people online is through content. It's not particularly surprising. If you think about where the majority of label investment has gone since the 80s, huge costs have been associated with music videos. That's bread and butter content for us. And it doesn't have to be a big music video shoot for it to make a huge difference. It really comes down to the idea, the execution, the audience, and the partnership that you can develop with your team. So I expect our team to start moving towards the number that the marketing team has at the same time as they continue to bolster their staff. We collaborate a lot with our sales team. We see platforms like Spotify, Apple, YouTube, et cetera, as having heavy portions of both the sales editorial push and the marketing push. Because at the end of the day, you could be on every single playlist on Spotify, and there's going to be a cap to how many streams you're going to get. Whereas if you have, there's no real cap to how many fans you can create. And if you're creating millions and millions of fans, next thing you know, it's those millions of fans are going to be clicking play, not just on your current content, but hopefully on everything you're doing going forward. Where our jobs have become much more core to what I envisioned our jobs being when I stepped into this, which is like, our main job is to make a fan, is to make somebody fall in love with a song, to have an emotional connection with another human being. And I think, I'm sorry, I said another human being, I should say with another human being's art. But yeah, I think that, from a staffing perspective, I expect, my ambition is to double our team as quickly as possible, is to lean a lot more into the data side of things, and to really take our learnings, mash them up with our creativity, and get a lot more experimentation out there at the same time as, making sure that we're hammering home all the best practices that we know need to happen for every project.
Yeah, no, and appreciate going into depth there, and tons of follow-on questions every sentence. No, but I mean, the things that jump out to, I love the kind of the foundational level of really asking the question of creating fandom and creating fans. That is the foundation. And then applying kind of a data meets creative approach grounded in experimentation is ultimately how you're going to be able to really methodically make progress and double down on what you can empirically identify what's actually working. So in that vein, like, how do you track success from a marketing perspective for your artists? Like, and I know there's lots of variables. So variables, KPIs. If you could dive into a couple, that'd be very helpful.
Sure. The most obvious one is streams.
Right.
That's where the majority of our revenue comes from these days. It's also where we have the longest tail. So monitoring streaming growth is really important for us. But again, to your point, it really depends on kind of what the goal of the campaign is. If we're working on an established artist, who has millions of fans on Instagram and followers or monthly listeners on Spotify, Apple, et cetera, that space, I think, is one where we can be really like, ambitious, for lack of a better term. Like, I think that there's a lot for us to learn per project, but when you're starting from the top, you can't expect to grow day two, right? Like, if you already have a tremendous fan base, and people know you within the market, especially if there's major media saturation, you can generally expect your first week to be your biggest week of streams. Possibly the album release week as well. That's another time that you're going to get a huge spike in streams. And so a big part of our first week is maximizing those streams, those first week streams. Because the higher you start, the longer it's going to take to decay, hopefully, assuming that the content is received fairly well. So that's a big part of it, and really seeing kind of like how an artist streams compared to both, records that we know are working in the market from competitors and from our own label, and then additionally, what's worked for that artist in the past. If we have an artist whose last track did 5 million first week, best case scenario, we want to be doing more than 5 million first week the next time we put a song out, right? That's just progress in terms of audience development and things along those lines. It's a little bit tough to read the tea leaves perfectly, because at the same time, you can create fans of a celebrity that aren't necessarily fans of their music. And so, we do look at social numbers and we do look at social growth as a way to measure kind of like how we're developing an audience. But at the end of the day, one of the things that we've really doubled, if not tripled down on is being able to understand the audience and really which audiences can help us drive an artist's career. One of the major sea changes that we've had has been a transition from basically taking the passion from young folks, mixing it with the money from older folks, to create a viable business for an artist, right? So when you're young, you have all the time and energy in the world to discover music, to talk about music with your friends, to watch music videos, to create playlists, to burn CDs. That doesn't happen anymore. But back in the day, burn CDs, or make tapes or whatever it was. I think that I don't know. It's a little bit of a funny aside, but I do think that as you look at that transition, there are key learnings that are starting to emerge in terms of us really needing to make sure that we're engaging that youngest audience in a meaningful way. Because at the end of the day, especially during COVID, where touring has pretty much, become non-existent, and where merch sales have been decoupled from album bundles, you're now in a place where essentially it's really hard to monetize your artist career using only that larger, that older fan base. Because that older fan base, you're competing with the fact that they probably have kids, they probably have jobs. I shouldn't say probably. They possibly have kids, possibly have jobs. They're engaging in 1,000 different things that are happening. They're worrying about putting food on the table, et cetera. And so they're not thinking, what's the new music that came out today? And a lot of times when they go and think about the music that they love, they return to the stuff that they know. Because at that point in their lives, they're probably searching for more comfort, for more nostalgia than they are necessarily the new, for the experimentation. And look, I'm talking in very general senses, and there are plenty of older music fans that stream like crazy. I know I'm one of them. I definitely fall into that category. But I do think at the same time, we see the volume coming from that youngest generation. And so we really need to maximize the engagement coming from that 13 to 17 and 18 to 24 demos, so that by the time those fans become 25 to 34, et cetera, we make it to a place where they can actually re-engage via touring, merch sales, et cetera. Right. But yeah, it's hard to have both at the same time these days.
For sure.
Sorry, I know that was fairly far off from answering the question.
I like it. Well, to double down on one of the point, I mean, I think you peeled it apart into lots of valuable layers. I think one question, and I know Jordan has some other questions too about this, but when it comes to just the tracking and KPI side, I know you're kind of mentioning into different demographics, not getting too focused on social growth to the point where you're optimizing for the wrong thing, because there is a disconnect just between fans of celebrity and fans of art and music. I know, if you look at digital marketing in some other industries, you can get you can model attribution a lot better. You can have Google UTM links and look at lead sources into a website. On Spotify, you send traffic into a black box. I mean, you can see the statistics of people that are engaging, but for all the traffic you're driving externally, it's very hard to show direct attribution. So when it comes to driving streams, how have you gone about? I mean, what are the other layers of kind of KPIs, or how are you going to optimize your campaigns towards what will actually drive the most streams?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it goes back to the audience, because every audience is going to be looking for something different from what's galvanized them as an audience. Usually the artist, if not a song. And so in terms of conversion has never been part of what we've been able to see. We're not the ticket sellers, we're not the music sellers, and we're not the streaming company. We've tried to do those things in the past, but at the end of the day, the market has really solved for a lot of that. And so it's almost like we never had the benefit of knowing what the conversion looked like in the first place to be able to really get that level of information. And what I would say is actually, rather than getting less information these days, we get way more information. And so we get much more big data of what everything is happening on a given platform, just not attributed to an individual. So I don't have that conversion, but what I do have is number of streams that are happening every day. And what I also have is the way that those streams are being generated. And so I know that if somebody is searching for a track and then pressing play, to me, that's way more valuable than somebody who is hearing a song in a playlist and they just don't skip it, right? Because they could have walked away from their computer or from their phone or whatever it was that they were listening to music. So when we talk about driving streams specifically, step one is building a relationship with the artist in a way that we can understand what they're doing from a conversion-based perspective. Best case scenarios, you're integrating them into our CRM database, and we do that through a myriad of ways. One of the main ways that we've done it is through collaborating around very fun BuzzFeed-esque quizzes. that are kind of along the lines of like, I'll give you an example. So we put a Backstreet Boys album out fairly recently. And in typical fashion, we did a campaign that said like, okay, which Backstreet Boy are you? Pretty simple stuff, right? But all we did was have a system set up so that you could scan your library using the Spotify API. And what that would do is match up your listening history with each of the individuals in Backstreet Boys listening history, and then spit out the Backstreet Boy that you have the most overlap with, present you with a playlist, present you with social graphics that you can then share. And so like all of a sudden there's this reason for you to be talking about Backstreet Boys on your timeline, et cetera. And they're granted, like we were engaging with a slightly older fan base, obviously based on, how much success they've had over the years. But I think that core engagement and that personalization of the content to yourself is something that humans try and do naturally. They try and fit TV shows, music into their lives. I say this a lot, like we're one of the few industries where people define who they are as people by our content. Like if you're having a conversation, maybe this is just too much on my side of things, but if you're having a conversation with somebody that you've never met before, you're generally going to talk about books you've read, movies you like, shows you like, and music you like is a huge part of them. You walk down the halls of a high school, at least when I was in high school, and you looked in the lockers, like people had posters of their favorite artists in those lockers, and they didn't do that because like they were getting some reward for doing that. They're doing that because they're saying, when you see me, I want you to think of this, or vice versa. When you see this brand, I want you to think of me because I am as alternative as Marilyn Manson, or I am as, witty as the next artist as Father John Misty or whomever it is, like people use our content to define who they are. And I think that as a result of that, like we need to give them reasons to do so and ways to do so. And I think that that's really where our goal to kind of increase streams comes from. And then in terms of the actual methodology that happens, it really depends on the artist. So it could be very Spotify heavy. It could be ex-US heavy, where we know that we need to grow from an international perspective because we have great saturation in the US market, but we haven't caught up ex-US. That can take kind of like the role of like, it could be something as simple as working with other artists in other markets who are on the much smaller side of things that upload covers to YouTube. Cool, we have a huge artist breaking in the US, and we're starting to see a little bit of bubbling in Germany. Let's go find a German creator that uploads covers of US songs in German onto his or her YouTube channel. And let's get them to cover our song. And in exchange, we'll make sure the artist supports them and gets them the attention that they deserve for collaborating with us. And hopefully they can spiral, more subscribers, et cetera, off for themselves as part of it. But yeah, I think every solution should hopefully be that nuance outside of the best practice stuff, which is, make sure that your links have retargeting pixels, make sure you have email sign up across your websites, those kinds of things.
Right. A little bit earlier, you mentioned lifecycle, which is something that we haven't really discussed on the podcast much, of a fan, where you invest a lot into marketing right now because you want them in 10 years to come back and buy merchandise, which kind of begs the larger question of how do you judge, I guess, a marketing campaign, and how do you decide what time span to kind of stop judging that campaign? So if you put in, $20,000, $30,000 or whatever the budget is right now for an artist, how do you judge what is the time span that you're paying attention to? Is it like 2 weeks after the album comes out, or is it that 10 years when you get that merchandise 10 years later,
Yeah, great question. For us, it generally comes down to, I was going to say as long as it takes, but that's not true because there's a certain point you're going to get off, right?
Right.
I do think that like our industry thrive. Like I would love to say I know what songs are going to break. Like we know which ones we have a really, really good feeling about. We know which artists we think have a really strong proposition, audience, and story to tell. But at the end of the day, until we get the music into the market, it's really hard to judge where it's going to go. And so we use two things. We use history to define kind of like what we can expect to see in the future, right? That's that comparison thing that I was talking about in terms of what did you stream last time? What are you going to stream this time? But then there's also the other side of that, which is really like being able to gauge the social conversation. What are people saying about the music? And then watching both the streams and the conversation over time. And, as we're doing that, like we're constantly throwing stuff at the wall, seeing what sticks, grabbing onto it, pouring gasoline on it, doing it again. It's this constant experimentation kind of repetition where like you're just constantly cycling through new ways to get music in front of people learning from those, and then trying to double, triple down on them. And so there's no specific answer, but really the time that we tend to stop working on a particular project is either when it's apparent that there's no more growth left in it. And at that point, our strategy shifts to extending the tail as long as possible, which probably means less investment and more kind of like intelligent placement and things along those lines, or things that branch out of the music side of things. Of the digital music side of things. So award shows, things like that, right? We're going to use records that have stuck around for a long time to make sure our artists are performing on the Billboard Music Awards, the Grammys, et cetera. When we see a track that's starting to decay faster than we expect, we start to employ different strategies, right? Because at that point, everything that we threw at the wall isn't sticking. And so that's not a sign for us to give up. It's never a sign for us to give up when when something doesn't work immediately. But at the end of the day, we do have, a lot of work on our plates. And so we have to optimize on where the opportunities are. And so at a certain point, whether it's week 5 or week 35, there's going to be a point where it's like, okay, what do we do next for the artist? And usually that's the question. It's not, let's stop working on this artist. It's like, okay, we've taken this as far as we think it can go. What have we learned? And what do we do to apply that to the next one? And that's a conversation like ongoing while you're evaluating your current situation. You're always trying to think of what comes next for the artist. And every now and then you're going to get lucky and you're going to trip into something viral, et cetera. And you're going to, take it for a win and maximize and all that fun stuff. But at the end of the day, hopefully you can be strategic enough that when you're launching a project after having some activity around an artist, not only are the algorithms warmed up with your DSPs and with your digital service providers and with your socials, but you also have an engaged audience that's easier to reach than they were prior to us creating that campaign.
Right. Awesome. So a little bit earlier, you mentioned investment. And I want to go back to that word in particular because I kind of want to talk about, obviously, I assume that in certain people's deals, they have a budget for marketing, a large scale budget for marketing. But I do think it's much harder, as we've discussed earlier, to kind of track the investment back on that marketing in particular. So how do you, after you've decided to invest in resources in marketing a song or a product, how do you track how that investment was actually used after it's been deployed and if it was used efficiently or not?
You mean, how do we account for where the money goes, basically?
Yeah, and then how do you at the return? Yeah, exactly.
Oh, okay, the return on investment. Got it. That's I think that goes back into the muddy waters and not being able to control the conversion. We don't control the conversion, so we don't see it.
Right.
And man, we've had so many conversations internally, externally about databases that we could build out where you could plug in automated information, where your ad campaigns could automatically just flow in. Maybe I've just been doing this, so long that I'm stuck in my ways. But I do think that is a little bit of a fool's errand. I don't think that numbers alone tell our story. They're extremely valuable, and I can't downplay how important data has become for our industry. But at the same time, two sets of numbers across two different campaigns don't always mean the same thing. And you have to keep the context of the artist and the audience and the fan base and the directionality of what that artist's career is doing, et cetera. So yeah, I'm trying to think of the best way to describe it, but essentially you have a lot of people within the company who are constantly iterating, who are anecdotally exposed to all of our campaigns and who are trusting my department, our data sciences department and our sales team to be able to contextualize what is and isn't working. And then those are the methods that we're going to carry into the next campaign for those key artists. So I'll give you a great example. So, or at least what I think is a great example. So 5, 6, 7 years ago, probably we started talking about TV performances. What is the value of, I guess at that time it would have been Conan or Lennon or whomever, what is the value of a late night TV? And granted, what's the quality of the late night TV performance is a big part of that. But at the end of the day, in a best case scenario, after we've done a TV, how much did sales, how much did downloads go up, et cetera, over the next 7 days? And what we started to realize was that there was a lot of investment going into this space, and there's a lot of general awareness within the music landscape in terms of getting in front of people, but it didn't necessarily create new fans. It didn't necessarily break new artists unless it was one of the exceptions to the rule. And so the question became is this the right place to put our investment? Or should we minimize what we're spending here in order to maximize what we're spending somewhere else where we are seeing a little bit more success? And again, that's always going to come back down to the artist. If they are great live performers, we're going to put them on TV. We're going to make sure that they can be seen as that. If that's not their core strength, if their core strength is, what they mean to a culture, what they mean to the fashion industry, what they mean to a person from an emotional perspective in terms of like making them fit in, feel like they fit in within their world or feeling less alien in their own skin. I think those are things that like, we're going to put the investment in that area, and it's really hard to convey that through a TV performance.
Right.
Ultimately, whatever we try, we're going to try and do our best. But we have enough, and I think actually this gets into the value of a label. We have a limited number of human beings at RCA Records who are working on an enormous amount of projects, and as a result, that exposure gives us a lot of learnings that allow us to carry things into. So, looking at one particular campaign, the best case scenario is we're picking up on the nuances that make that campaign either successful or less successful. Whereas when you start to get into our general learnings, there isn't a company out there that's putting out 100+ albums a year. You know what I mean? Like outside of label, obviously. And so even if you're the best manager in the world, you may not have as much exposure as we do to the data and to the multiple iterations that we've had across artists, across audiences, across genres, et cetera.
Right.
Yeah. I love that. So in that vein, and I think, you're mentioning testing and iterating upon a lot of different tactics, contextualizing that across the experience and returns that you're seeing across a range of different artists, trying to deploy tactics that are relevant to those specific artists, because obviously there's no one size fits all. In that vein, one thing that's fascinating to me as a marketer is this notion of, I guess you can call it like underpriced attention. And I think at a higher level, you essentially will always have and always will continue to have evolution in consumer behavior. And to the extent that you can be a bit of an early mover on a marketing tactic before it's oversaturated by other marketers trying to deploy that same tactic, that's where you can really tap into that underpriced attention sweet spot. So I'm curious from your experience, in the past 5 to 10 years, what have been some tactics that you've seen have their run, but then fall and kind of like shift out of favor, and then use that as kind of a stepping stone into what you're seeing work well right now? Because I know like TikTok influencer campaigns are super hot. Like Facebook, Instagram native ads can be pricey, but you can get really targeted. So really interested to hear kind of your perspective on that.
Yeah, first off, that's a great point, and I haven't heard the term underpriced attention before, and I'm totally going to steal that. So thank you for that one. Because it's a great way to define exactly what it is. Past 5 years, places that, fair warning, to barely remember what I did yesterday. But when I try and expand that far and think back, the things that jump out to me are, I'm trying to stay away from the influencer campaigns because I know we'll get to that towards the end of this specific question. The Spotify campaigns are one. The D2C business is one where, the right investment and the right strategy behind that, I felt like was a competitive advantage for a minute. And then the space matured really, really quickly. And everybody started doing the same thing. We were one of the first, if not the first labels to start experimenting with ticket bundles. But we did it differently because we were struggling to find ways to collaborate with the ticketing agencies. And granted, because, I don't think anybody who's selling tickets is going to want to add money to the cost of the ticket that isn't going towards the ticket itself. And so there was pushback at the time, but I remember it was for an upcoming Pink tour. And rather than attach the album to the ticket itself, what we did was we attached the pre-sale code to the album pre-order. And so if you went to a store early on and you pre-ordered the album, you got a code that gave you access to buy tickets before literally everybody else, including the Amex pre-sales, the City pre-sales, et cetera. And we found that was actually a really, really good experience for fans because in a lot of ways, it's hard for great fans to get great seats, And if you're a fan that's willing to engage, invest on the D2C side of things for an artist, I do think that there should be additional rewards for you. And not only that, but those are the people you want front row at your concerts, right? You want the people who are screaming fanatically, singing along with you. And more than anything, you want them to have your new music. And if they don't have your new music in the first place, how are you going to get them to sing along with your new records? That's one example. It's funny, I can actually think back to when pseudo videos were a thing. I don't know if that's a term that gets used on here, but it's basically the audio asset on YouTube. That was a space that we leaned into really, really quickly. Must have been 8 years ago at this point. And I remember we didn't even know what to call them at the time. We just we're like, this is something that people are engaging with. We should do more of it. And so we were able to get a lot of that underpriced attention on a lot of our records at the time that we then had to evolve from okay, we have a lot of attention on these, but they're not driving revenue because we don't have the right deal in place with YouTube. But that needed to come, that came down the road as we continued to engage and collaborate with them. Man, it's a tough question.
So we asked on the Music Business Podcast, tough questions.
Yeah. The cheap way out and just jump right into what we've been doing recently, because that's definitely top of mind.
For sure.
Yeah, and I think the influencer campaign, I definitely think is a great place to think about where we've leaned in and where we've experimented in a lot of different ways. A big part of it was basically, to be honest, a little bit of stumbling into the success. We had seen what was happening on platform. We were keeping a close eye on it with artists like Lil Nas X, who obviously was not just a TikTok story; it was very much a social media story. But as we continue to see the platform get growth, I can't tell you how pessimistic I was day one. I was like, man, we've seen this stuff before, and like it's working because the song's a hit, blah blah blah. And then we started to snip a little bit of attention on records like Doja Cat Say So, Brockhampton Sugar. And you started to honestly before that, because those were campaigns that we had activated. Before that, you started seeing the effect on records even like Licky Lee had a record that was starting to grow because somebody had taken the song, slowed it down, and was making creations on TikTok. And it took us, honestly, like a week or two to be able to figure out where that was even coming from, because it wasn't associated with the artist. It didn't have the artist name in the sound or anything along those lines. But as a result, we could see okay, well, this is an audience that's clearly engaging with music in a different way than any other platform. And the beauty of TikTok for us has been content aggregation behind a sound, right? Like that's what their bread and butter is, versus content aggregation behind a creator, somebody you follow, or an image or a hashtag, right? Like they're only showing you audio first. And then if you want to dig deeper, you go and see whatever other people have done with that exact same audio. And so that started to emerge as a learning. We started to lean in very aggressively. And I think that's how we took those learnings to lean in early with artists like Doja Cat and with Brockhampton to take some shots. And those shots have been varied in terms of execution, et cetera. For us, what we learned early on was okay, cool. We know that there are big influencers on the platform that can spark things, but just paying a big influencer to do something is not going to work. And you shouldn't expect it to work. What you should expect to work is if you can get a bunch of, mid-tier influencers, people who have 50,000 to 1 million kind of followers, to help you create a trend via volume and honestly their expertise. I'm not going to go to a 16-year-old influencer on TikTok and expect to tell them what to do on the platform, right? They are the expert. That's why we're paying them. It's not just reach,
right? Because
they're on the platform 24/7. And honestly, a lot of the best agencies that we work with, who work with these kids on a regular basis, have literally high schoolers sitting in their office just screwing around on the app, telling them what's cool, telling them what trends are starting to emerge. And I think that was a really good place for us to lean into early on. These days, the market has become totally saturated. There's no question. But at the end of the day, I think what's promising is the fact that other tech companies have registered what is working, and they're starting to double down on it. And it is that algorithmic presentation of audio first content, sound on platforms. And even when stories launched, taking the success from what Snapchat had done and adopting it into the polite way to say it is adopting it into the Instagram ecosystem. People still didn't have their audio on. You turn your audio on if you realize that it was kind of worth putting your audio on. But they even had stickers on platform that said audio on, right? Because you had to tell people that there was something worth listening to there. So just having that platform alone, and then for this to hopefully be the next stories. That's my mindset. It's if algorithmic audio first content, vertical content, short form video becomes the new stories, I think our industry has a lot of success in front of us in terms of being able to create these trends, collaborate with the trendsetters, and acknowledge kind of the trends that kids are making on their own, so that we can, thank them for their participation and hopefully get the artist involved and get them a lot of what they're looking for, which is some sort of attention or endorsement from the artists they love.
Right. Awesome. So I want to get into some really big campaigns that you've done in the past. Primarily, This Is America. Sure. I think that record in particular. I think I would assume that when you approach the marketing for it, you had to be very specific and very particular how you released it to the world. And I'm sure the first time you heard it, you probably did exactly what the rest of the world did, which was say, "Holy shit!" So, and start maybe dancing a little bit and then reflecting on the country. But how did you approach, and this kind of begs to the larger question too, is, what are some things what's some information you need right off the bat when you're starting a digital marketing campaign, and how did those questions and how did those inquiries help shape the marketing campaign for This Is America?
For sure. Just writing this down so I don't forget any of the questions. So
This
Is America is one of my favorite projects to talk about. It's one of my favorite projects. You know what I mean? Like, it's just like, it's the perfect intersection of I don't know, it's art. It's art with a capital A is how I would define it, because it means something, and it's not just, it's not a commercial product by itself. And the funny thing was, when I first heard that record, man, it was right when we were talking to Donald's team about, bringing him in and seeing if he wanted to collaborate with RCA Records as a label, and I think even the fact that they wanted to take a conversation with RCA Records is a big source of pride for myself and for our company. Donald could have gone anywhere. Any label would have been more than happy to have him. And what we were able to display is that, we are an artist first label, and that we're going to follow an artist's lead and vision, especially, if it's somebody we believe in to the extent of what Donald's been able to do, not just as a musician, as a comedian, as a writer, as an actor.
Right.
It's just, everything is there. And at the time, they were very interested in how we had collaborated with someone like Justin Timberlake, who has had a lot of success in a lot of different areas, et cetera. But either way, long story short, as part of that conversation, they played us this little thing he was working on, and it had the rhythm from This Is America, and it had a little bit of the song structure there. But honestly, to my untrained ears in my marketing first day and our second years, I was like, okay, cool. There's something here, but I can't wait to hear the song. You know what I mean? It was I couldn't fathom it inside my head to the extent that I knew what it was going to be. And to be honest, I think one of the biggest things that you have to acknowledge with this song is that it was video first. That video did so much to be able to contextualize what was in that song. Because at the end of the day, man, there are people who've listened to a song 350 times in the span of a month that couldn't tell you one word that's in that song. You know what I mean? Paying attention to lyrics is not something that most people do. And so I don't think that people would have gone to the lengths that they did to be able to understand a record like This Is America, nor would they have had the willingness to engage with a sound that was a little bit different than they maybe heard on the radio or been hearing on their playlists as regularly. I mean, This Is America was a record that got pop play. You know what I mean? The cultural conversation around it was so big and so relevant that everybody had to get involved at some point. But I think when you look at it within the context of what broke, what we needed to do, the first thing that we look at is the audience, who is currently listening, how much are they listening, why are they listening, what's the next audience that we don't have that we know we need to go get, and then what are the strategies that we're going to take to go get them. But with someone like Donald, who had a fairly firm fan base at that point, it was much more about how do we present this content in a way that that connects with people as quickly as possible. And he and his management team had correctly identified that this visual was going to be the difference maker. And so, if I recall correctly, day one, video was the only thing we were pointing to on that song. And I think video even launched on platforms like Apple Music and Spotify around the same time. Which is not something that we do for Spotify on a regular basis. Spotify, we don't have a video distribution deal with them. But we knew that this visual, that our job would honestly be done if we could get people to watch this.
Right.
And look, at the end of the day, you can't discount what the artist delivered. The artist delivered what was probably, in my opinion, top 3 video all time kind of thing. For a video to have that much meaning within a culture, within a country, man, not a lot of people can do that. And the ones that can are just so special. So, that's, I talked about luck at the early part of it. And, the hard work came in collaborating with Donald and getting him to understand that this is a space that's going to trust his artistry and follow him wherever he wants to go, at the same time as not being shy about speaking up and lending our expertise in terms of what we've seen that maybe he hasn't been able to see through just the number of, experimentations like we talked about early on. But yeah, sometimes you just, the luck comes in and you get something delivered to you that is just so special that the most important thing you can do is not fuck it up.
Yeah.
I think that's what that record was. You know, we got out of the way. Our promo team did an amazing job. Our video team did an amazing job, kind of like just making sure everything was set up to be a success. The marketing team pushed everywhere that we could. The artists leaned in a way that hadn't happened in quite a while.
Right.
And so like, it was just like a perfect storm. But, you know, if you give me 5 videos that are This America quality, we will give you 5 campaigns that are This America quality, you know?
Right.
And to say that that's the only differentiator is not true. But like, it just was one of those cultural moments that, you know, This Is America hit that upper echelon of meaning something to so many people that, you know, the only thing we could do if we were trying was to slow it down. And why would we want to do that?
Yeah.
And what I'm hearing is you were inspired by the art, and that probably motivated you to do a better campaign. It's like, yeah, obviously this is really good and a lot of people will connect to it, but the first people that connected to it was you guys. You guys connected to it, and then you guys were like, man, I think that's what I hear when you say don't fuck it up, because you could have fucked it up. You know, it was just more so the inspiration that came from the content and the art itself, which is kind of when I think everything comes together perfectly, is when everyone's on the same page about how inspiring this thing is that you're promoting.
Mm-hmm. Getting on the same page is one of the most important things we do as a label, as an industry, et cetera, because you have a lot of people working on the same piece of content like in their different fields. And if they're all pointing in different directions, you're pulling the project apart at its seam. But if you're all standing behind it and pushing it, you know, there can be some real momentum behind that collaboration and that communication. But yeah, I do think that that's very much the case, is that, like, you know, it was something that connected with us early on. And in a lot of ways, we are salespeople, you know, like I hate to think of myself like that, but if I go into a conversation, you know, with our peers at one of the companies that we collaborate with on a regular basis, and I'm ever able to deliver an impassioned, you know, speech as to why this matters and why we're so excited about it, that most likely is going to have a positive effect. And, you know, we say it within our company on a regular basis, like my Instagram handle is completely private. It will always be private. That's how I live. You know? But at the end of the day, we are still our influencers within our own circles. And, you know, when Columbia has something going on, when Epic has something going on, with Universal labels, et cetera, you know, we're peers enough with each other that you start to get exposed to what the other labels are doing just through your natural kind of social kind of history, et cetera. But at the end of the day, like, we're influencers, you know, like we do influence the market in one way or another. And if we can create a reaction through our own channels at the same time as, you know, collaborating with our peers at the DSPs, and then also affecting what the fans are doing, you have to have passion to be able to do that. It's really hard to fake that for an extended period of time. And maybe the great ones can, but at the end of the day, you know, there's no question that working on a campaign that you feel like is important is a great motivator. It can also be really frustrating though, right? Like, if you believe in a record, if you believe in an artist and you want it to work and it doesn't, that can also be one of the most frustrating things on the planet. Because at the end of it, and that's honestly one of the funniest things I see on our comments on a regular basis is, you know, like, you don't support this artist, you don't want them to win, you know, like they like, this is the RCA doesn't care. And the truth of the matter is, like, that is insane. The only thing we want is success. Like, if there's a way for us to get success and it's standing in front of us, we're going to go and grab it, you know? And I think a lot of times it's hard to separate your fandom from kind of like how the rest of the world kind of views your favorite artist. And so it is funny to see that kind of like that feedback from an audience, whereas knowing that, like, you know, you may be getting panned for the work you're doing on a campaign, but you could be spending 20 hours a week just banging your head against the wall trying to find ways to break through with that record, with that artist, etc. We don't sign artists to love, you know, like that would be a very silly thing to do. We don't collaborate with on business opportunities that we don't think have a good chance of being successful. Our industry is filled with failure, you know, like we have to acknowledge that, and it's filled with big acts. And at the end of the day, you know, your label is probably as successful as your biggest act is, but the future of your label is defined by your ability to create those big acts.
Right.
Well, that's an incredible note to end on, man. I think we've been able to cover a lot of grounds. I think it's really loved a lot of the different principles and tactics you spoke to. And I mean, even just kind of going full circle to the beginning, just the ability to kind of climb the mountain, adapt when there's a boulder in the way, and just continue to take that approach throughout your entire career. So cheers, man. Thank you so much for coming on. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. Let's talk soon. Cheers.
Right, cheers. Man, Tarek, MVP. Oof.
Right.
That episode, that was hit. What'd you think, man?
Right. I thought it was awesome. And I just want to let people know that when we do text during interviews to decide who's going to speak next, because we're always very excited to speak to guests. And Sam did text me, I am enjoying this interview in the middle of the interview. So just to give you an idea of what we thought about it. But hey, man, I thought it was really awesome. I think somebody who's worked at that level for a decade in a very particular field, I think you're going to get a lot of knowledge, not just for what works now, but what's worked over time and how to actually learn from that history and use it to help with future campaigns. So I'm very glad that we were able to get him on. I think that he laid out all of his points in a very succinct and concise way for people to pick it up and take notes, because I know some of you guys take notes. So yeah, I'm just really glad that we were able to interview him. What'd you think, Sam?
Yeah, I thought it was incredible, man. I think both from some of the intrinsic skills around adaptability, being comfortable with failure, to some of the more tactical sides of digital marketing when it comes to the different sorts of campaigns he's running, how he's tracking performance, how he's focused on building foundational fandom and emotional connection with fans and the art of artists. I really found this to be an incredible episode. And I think for you guys that are listening, I mean, yeah, like Jordan said, hopefully you took some good notes, but I think really use this as an opportunity to ask yourself, like, what are some of the specific tactics that you learned today, or things that he spoke about that you want to deploy in developing yourself as an artist you may work with? I think there are tons of gems, and I think this can definitely set you all up to succeed. So don't just listen to it and forget it. It's about that action. So let's see what comes next. And as always, we appreciate the action of you guys tuned into the podcast. So until next week, super grateful for y'all. Peace.
Thank you, guys.